officially welcome to the Fire Thread podcast. I'm so excited to have you on this. We have the amazing Neil Meredith on here, and we met at Blue Earth last year, didn't we?
We did,
and I
yeah.
really wanted you on the podcast because immediately I was like, first of all, you'd worked in Bolton, so we bonded over that. But you just immediately got it in terms of the commercial aspects and the sustainability aspects. And I was like, I need to get you on and we need to talk about this further. But before we dig in, could you introduce yourself?
Of course, yeah. Well, I am, you've introduced me nicely, but I guess going back right to the very start, I was that council estate kid that just wanted to be a footballer. So I didn't do school. And the reason why I say that is I ended up being an apprentice and then a pro for 4 years. And I just stayed in football for the rest of my life. So I either played at a decent level or more latterly in the last 25 years have been in and around the commercial side of football. So 50% of my time has been spent in consumer technology, and then 50% of my time has been spent in football and business around football. So yeah, we obviously clicked at Blue Earth because I was on a bit of a high, mainly from just like the collaborative nature of just like I'd been to trade shows all over the world. Everybody's a bit protective. Nobody really wants to tell it. Consumer tech's very kind of closed, and Blue Earth was just like, you know, how do we all have the same aim, right? Which is like, how do we improve business, make it more responsible, and try and save the planet we're on. So I was on a bit of a high, and when you said, "Oh, I'm from Bolton," I was like, "Oh, we need to talk." And then, if I remember rightly, I was trying to explain to you where the old place was, which I did a terrible job of. But I had 4 years in Bolton, which I loved and spent lots of times around Bolton and Manchester, but mainly in the consumer technology business. And then more latterly, I'd say the last 20 years, through connections of being a professional footballer. I had a concierge business that looked after Premier League footballers and their wives. We had a business that helped footballers when they came to the end of their career. I was kind of like the go-to guy for video games companies who wanted Premier League football talent when they were doing a game launch. So yeah, I'm in and around sport. Been at mainly football, but more latterly a lot of the outdoor space as well. I'm doing some interesting stuff in the outdoor events arena, which is good. Really enjoying that.
Excited to hear about that. I mean, I've got to ask, which is your kind of favourite area to have focused on?
Well, it depends how you quantify that, right? Like I made plenty of money in the consumer technology business. So I was very lucky that I did 2 startups that I sold to public companies. So that from a material gain perspective was like super, and we had 2 great teams, which was awesome. But weirdly, I think it's a bit like if you own a football club. Like I've been doing lots of work in the football space, never really made any money, and that's not lack of ability or lack of opportunity. It's just it's a different market. You know, it's you tend to do things because of your passion rather than your P&L. Like as a consultant or a non-exec or whatever I happen to be in that time, you just get excited. You know, I spent 3 years, nearly 3 years, helping a group of ex-professional footballers who were like proper legends set up a company that was going to help footballers at the end of their career. Like never made a penny. The whole thing should have been a charity, but loved it. Like it was so exciting to try and help these people that kind of get defined by kicking a ball about, and then they're like, oh, I don't know what to do after. And there's genuinely a real problem of how they re-identify themselves. So that was great, but never made a penny. So I guess it depends on how you quantify success. I've just been really lucky, mate. I left school, no qualifications, became a footballer. I was thinking about this the other day. I've travelled to 6 continents, so just haven't been to Antarctica because there's not a lot of football up there. So through football and consumer tech and business, travelled the world, made loads of friends. So when you kind of look back and go, left school, I kind of didn't do school really. I was just like kicking the ball against the garage most of the time. So not that that's a good tip for people in terms of, you know, don't do education, but it just, football and consumer tech just gave me that opportunity to go and see the world and make friends all over the place, which was great.
I mean, it sounds amazing, and I'm going to dig into that in more detail in just a sec, but I'm just curious by what you've said, because I think it's a really important point in terms of actually I had Ben Hardy-Jones on the podcast last week, and he'd gone into Desert Vipers as his first job. And actually, sometimes it's this idea that you don't necessarily have to have years of experience. Like, you can have these skills of just being really curious, really passionate about something. And I'm just wondering, kind of hearing your background, what has been the biggest skill that's really kind of helped you in your career?
Well, weirdly, this is what I say to a lot of the footballers that are kind of they're looking to see what they do next. Um, we got so many transferable skills when you come out of football, right? Whether you're a team player, a leader, I mean, just if you can cope, and it's definitely sanitized in more recent times, but back in the day when I was an apprentice, if you could cope with dressing room banter in the 80s and the 90s, you could cope with any PLC boardroom. Like, I've genuinely sat in big PLC boardroom meetings, and people around me who are far more qualified because they've been in PLC boardrooms for years have just folded. And I'm kind of sitting there going, this is a walk in the park in comparison to being at 17 years old and getting stuck in a laundry basket and then put in the bath, right? So those kind of things, they make you resilient. I mean, there's all sorts of stories, but it's basically that resilience and the things that you take from being a footballer. They are really transferable into I think into lots of walks of life, to be honest. That's for sure.
Definitely. And now I'm kind of keen to dig into your long and expansive career. You know, you've been in the tech and sports space for, you've said, like 35 years. So I'm really intrigued to kind of see what changes you've seen in that time.
Oh, crikey. I guess they'd sort of fall into a few areas. So the main thing is obviously moving from sort of like analog world to a digital world, right? And before we get into like social and digital and all that, like, you know, I remember my first sales job. You used to basically, you'd have a map and you'd flick through to find the customer, and then you'd get into a phone box and you'd phone the office and you'd phone through your order, right? Now, you know, I can be 2 clicks away from finding the buyer at JD Sports because of LinkedIn. You know, so that analog to digital has like revolutionized the whole thing. And then I think, got let's not call it sustainability right now, right, for the purpose of this. But I think back in the day, most of us in business were irresponsible, and now I definitely see this shift to being responsible, whether that's mode of transport, whether that's where you get product from, all of those kind of things. So there's a big shift in that. I think there's this constant battle between, and I see this a lot in football, it's like this whole price versus brand versus value. Like, it just constantly goes in this kind of roller coaster ride. And particularly when you're talking to retailers, you know, they're like, oh, I've got to buy direct from the Far East. And then they go, oh, got the margins, but the returns were higher. And there's this circular thing. And as a guy who's been in it 35 years, the thing that I say to a lot of the young people that I mentor and coach now, I'm like, it just goes in cycles. So just be patient. Like, it always comes back around. And I see it with certainly some of the consumer marketing people that I help. They panic if they have a bad Thursday. And I'm like, look, just relax. Like, have a look at it at the end of the month, have a look at it at the end of the quarter. Like, there's just this real kind of daily pressure that's there. And then obviously the biggie is COVID, you know, and I think that's the same for everybody. I'm very old school where I like to travel and meet people and see people. So that really kind of changed the landscape for business. And I'm not sure it's come back. Like, I'm not sure this screen to screen thing, you know, lots of people that I talk to aren't yet back to the office. So, you know, you're kind of going, hey, where do I send samples? And they're like, well, if you send them into the office, I won't see them for a while. I don't really want to give you my home address. It's like how do we communicate? How do we do business together? So COVID has been a biggie. But I think that big shift from analog to digital, from analog to digital was a biggie. But I'm super interested in this sort of like irresponsible to responsible thing. It's something I've been doing. You know, I've been doing a lot of thinking about it over the last 5 or 6 years myself.
And I'd love you to talk more about that because, you know, when we met at Blue Earth, I kind of knew you indirectly. I found out through your daughter. And when I met you, I was kind of amazed that, you know, you'd had this long career. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost you'd had this epiphany, you'd seen it through your child's eyes, and you'd really had an awakening of, okay, well, I'm in the system, but how could I make it better? What changes could I do? So I wonder if you could talk a bit more about that landscape, it being potentially an irresponsible industry, and how do we move it to being more responsible?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. Yeah, I mean, I've sold millions and millions and millions of units of product over the years, and back then I didn't know what I know now, and I wasn't aware of the damage that we were all kind of doing to the planet. You just get into this, grow, grow, grow at all costs, and but a couple of things stuck in my memory more, and this wasn't about sustainability so much. This was just about, I always had this little mantra: no matter what we did in business, we always wanted to do the right thing, and it was just like a nice sort of set of guardrails that meant we always at least tried to do the right thing, and that would be factories that we would work with in China. If we got a bad vibe when we went in, I wouldn't even need a technical guy to go in and tell me. I was like, nah, we're not dealing with these guys. So we were always selective, but we were always like, well, we need product, and people not making it in Europe, and so we've got to, And one of the biggies for me was that I vividly remember it. Because I was in a business that was either video games or Apple, everything that we did as an accessory company was linked to the launch of a new phone or a new game. And I remember we air freighted some product in from China, and it was probably, I'm probably talking mid 2000s, right? And one of our team was just like, they were just not happy, and I was like, "What's the problem?" And he's like, "What you do?" And this was mid 2000, so he was like, "Oh, carbon emissions." And I was like, "Whoa, what are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, I don't like it going on a plane." I was like, "Well, you need to tell me more about it." So anyway, that was the first time it got on my radar. But then I did a deal. We did a licensing deal with Disney, which was, again, trying to do the right thing. We developed a kid's tablet. I could see it through, just being around, that kids were getting access to a mobile device and a web browser at a very early age, like way too early. So we were like, look, let's develop this safe web browser that means the kid thinks they're getting on the internet, but they're not. They're going into YouTube Kids. They're not getting served any digital ads, any nasty pop-ups, etc., etc. And we went to Disney and presented it. They loved it, and we basically took the Disney license and put it on a tablet. Happy days. And I was so pleased with myself. I was walking the dog with my daughter Ellie, who you know, and I was like, "Hey, I did a deal this morning. We get 45,000 units going into this big distributor and a retailer in Australia called Big W." And she's 12, 13 at the time. She looked totally underwhelmed by it, right? Dad's like, "Hey, what a great guy I am," and she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "You don't seem that fussed." And I knew telepathically what she was thinking. And she sort of, we talked a bit as we were walking the dog, and then I got back and I was like, that's 45,000 kids that I've kept safe from the internet, but that's also 45,000 kids that are going to sit on their couch in Australia instead of go to the beach or a park or tree, And I just had this moment where I was like, listen, mate, you're well networked, people, like, why don't you start at least trying to do part of your work in the sustainability space? And I'll be honest, I got technically scared by it, right? Because you get into it, and at that time you either had to be perfect and you had to know everything, or you were a greenwasher. And I was just curious. I was like, hang on a minute. And all through my business life, one of the successes that we've always had has just been, well, if that's the norm, let's do it different, right? So when we did video game accessories in Bolton, everything was coming in from American brands, and we were like urchins sitting in Manchester. I'm like, we can do that. Like, why are people in Britain buying it off American brands? We could do it as a British brand. So that's what we did. So I was kind of like, I'll be honest, I was put off by a lot of stuffy, kind of patronizing-y, tonal stuff where I was like, oh, well, this isn't right for me with sustainability. But it just kept niggling away at me. I was like, well, if we're gonna do a product that's made out of materials. So at the time, I was launching a brand of our own, which was travel accessories that were going to be made out of leather. And I was talking to the factory, and the factory were like, we get lots of scrap. And I was there. I saw this hide And I said, how come you're not using it? And he said, it's got a scratch on it. And I was like, and I could see who it was for. And it was for a major UK incredible designer. And I said, so can we have it? Can we use it? So we used it. And then the guy was like, look, if you're looking to do circular or you're looking to use stuff that's going to waste, you should look at apple leather. So that's what we did. We started developing stuff in the apple leather space. And that just meant that I started having to learn the sustainability space without having to panic about all the technical elements.
And I think a lot of people will resonate with that. And that's really kind of why I wanted you to be on the podcast, is because you are quite humble in terms of what you know. You kind of don't put yourself over as an expert. You kind of are very clear on, actually, this is a big learning curve for me, but there's got to be a better way. And for the people who are kind of sitting opposite you in the boardroom, who might be feeling the same way, what's your advice to them? Who's kind of maybe thinking, I'm interested in sustainability, I know I should do something, but I just don't even know where to start.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think two different conversations. If I look at the consumer technology space, people are a lot further down that journey or that adventure than people give them credit for. Like, I think there's a lot of very good companies that are working towards science-based target initiatives, are EcoVadis, they're B Corp. They're really trying to be more responsible. There's loads to still do, but they're trying their hardest. I think with it, and that is from supply, wherever it's sourced, right the way through to the brand, and then the distribution partner and the retailer. There's a lot more knowledge in that sector. Within football, it's been really interesting because one of the things that I do at the moment is I'm trying to help sustainable and responsible companies talk to football. And football's a bit like a village pub, right? It's like, if you don't know anyone, you walk in and they're like, whoa. Whereas if you know people and you're networked, you can have a sensible conversation with people, even on a tricky topic. So I would say within football, there's this drive from legislation and regulation that is, I would say, boardroom down. And then there's this pressure from fan up. So like, I feel sorry for them. A lot of the executives that are in licensing and merch and product and sales and all of that thing that keeps the engine going in the football club, they're kind of like, hey, I'm being told I've got to be more sustainable. I don't really understand it, right? Because the word sustainable before in football used to be keep the club alive. How do we run the football club in a sustainable manner? Now it's like, how do we get more sustainable cups? How do we use less virgin plastic? How do we think about kits and what happens to kits after? So there's this real kind of, pressure's the wrong word, but this real kind of demand for knowledge. And what I found was a lot of people in the club space were like, when sustainable brands come in and talk to us, they just patronize us and they kind of talk down. And I don't think they do. It's just, classic example is like, people are talking different languages and I try and sit in the middle and go, well, try and say it like this and try and listen like this. So it's been a really interesting journey. I think everybody's trying. I've probably met with at least 50 to 60 football execs in the last 18 months, and none of them don't care. They all really care, and they're all at levels of education, knowledge, fear, pressure points. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of it just comes down to resource. They're like, we're spinning loads of plates. And I said this to a company that I'm trying to help. I said, look, what you're doing is great. And in 18 months' time, I think it'll be the thing, right? But right now, you've got to think about how you position your thing that resonates with the execs that are sitting in a club on a Monday morning reviewing the weekend. Because people are just going from one match day to the next match. Of course, there's people sitting at the top going, 5-year plan, strategic, where are we going? And those type of conversations with people on C-suite levels at a club, they're brilliant because they're all conceptual. Of course they want to do it. But then when you get down to how do we implement this and make it happen? Unless it's cropping up on a Monday morning meeting on a regular basis, it just gets put to another agenda for another meeting at another time, right? So, but I do feel like sometimes football doesn't do itself any favors in terms of all the good that it does. It's always a bit, football should be doing more, players should be doing more. Football generally doesn't highlight or spotlight some of the great stuff that it does. I'm personally impressed with a lot of the good stuff that I see that on a regular basis.
And is there anything that particularly comes to mind when you're thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're so as you know, I invested a small amount in Waterhaul, which is a company based in Cornwall, do incredible stuff. They go into the ocean, they collect ghost fishing nets, they bring it out of the ocean, they break it down to sort of molecular level, and then they turn it into sunglasses. So it's really circular, and we're having conversations with football clubs now about when they're putting a new seat into their stadium, use traceable materials from the ocean that then has a QR code on the seat that then the fan can scan the QR code and you can see where the nets came from and how it was taken off a whale off the coast of Cornwall. So those type of things that aren't, they're not gimmicks. They're genuinely clubs going, well, if we're going to replace plastic seats, we may as well do it with good plastic than bad plastic. And then how do you turn that story into something that then gives the fan some value, right? So those type of conversations are going on all the time, but nobody's going to put it on social. Nobody's going to tell the press. They're just operational day-to-day conversations that are happening in most businesses around the UK.
In my experience, what I found is that, especially in football, a lot of departments are siloed. And so often when you're trying to get in there as a small brand, you don't really know who to talk to, or you're not talking to the right department. And then the other thing, which we all know, is the commercial model of the current system. And, I know you've kind of talked about how clubs could approach that, like test and trial different things, compare, one against the other. And could you give us an example of how a club could do that? For example, if they were looking at more sustainable merch, how could they do it and it still be commercial?
I think it always comes this comment of commercial, right? To me, having done it with a championship side, the commercial part of it was, instead of making 85 points on something that's not great plastic, why don't you use something that's circular and make 70, right? Now, it all comes back to, is the club prepared to lose a bit of margin to be able to do the responsible thing, to definitely do a better product? There's no question the product would be better than the previous product. And you're right, like there are different paymasters within the club where, if you think about it, if someone's individual Christmas bonus at a time when everybody's under the cosh is reliant on that 8, 9, 10 points difference in margin on the number of X units that they sell, I understand why they're like, hey, Neil, if you really want us to do this, you've got to go back to the supplier and get the price down, because we want to. And having been around the block for 35 years, I understand their need, right? And what I do find is that these really well-intentioned, responsible companies, they don't always listen, because they're quite rightly, they're so passionate about their solution. They're like, no, we should have value. But my counter argument to them is, if you became the supplier to a very high profile championship club that is renowned in the industry and the fan base for doing the right thing, you by definition get the halo effect of being the. So there's a marketing element that you could take out of your P&L and not spend on marketing, but you get this collaboration and partnership with this awesome club. And that takes some explaining, right? Because a lot of these brilliant companies, who I love, by the way, like all of them have got the next best thing, and it's brilliant to see that passion. But it's just distilling that down into showing a bit of empathy to the customer, right? You know what it's like. No matter how much you try and say yours is the best thing, you still got to understand what the customer needs. And thankfully, the customer in this case is like, yeah, I do want to get to a percentage of my range to be sustainable, and this is a shoe in because it's easy. So sitting in the middle of trying to be that kind of Kofi Annan at the United Nations, of trying to figure that out, it's a really interesting job, and I think it's a personal skill. It's just, it's just trying to make sure that the balance is right. Explain to the very passionate IP holder that yes, you've got something that's great, but they have a need, and then trying to explain to the person that's got the need that they're doing their best. So can you just cut them a bit of slack? Because we all win. Like if you get the PR story and they get the story off it as well, then they're gonna grow their business. They're gonna have economy of scale. This incredible thing that we all love then becomes the norm, right? And wouldn't that be great if we were all sitting around drinking out the same type of circular plastic cups instead of some of the horrible stuff that we all get served? That would be great for football.
Yeah, it's great for everybody. I think when you're talking about the marketing of this, I think it works both ways, because also what an amazing story for a club as well. More and more clubs are releasing sustainability statements. There's such an opportunity there to almost like take a bit from the marketing budget and invest in these companies. And I know you do mentor and invest, with some great small brands that are coming through. Kind of, what advice do you give them? Do you know what I mean? Is there a kind of common advice across all of them? I can see you laughing. But, having so much experience and coming to these brands, what's the first thing that you see? And like I say, what's the advice that you kind of give them from the start?
It's there isn't anything that, if I was to say, is there anything that's common, it would be all of them feel like they're saving the world, which to be fair, in their own way, they are. They're doing their bit and they're very passionate about it, and they kind of go, it's perfect for football, right? And in a lot of cases, it is perfect for anything that involves a spectator going to a seat and watching some event. So that's not just about sport. That could be live gigs. That could be anything, right? And one of the big challenges is make your thing relevant. So yes, you've got this thing that is great. How do you make it relevant? And then when you've got it relevant, you've got two ways of talking to them. There's the, hey, I'm curious, I want to help, I think I've got part of your solution. And then there's the, hey, I've got the best thing in the world and you should take it, right? And that has been weirdly their preferred route to this. And these are only the people that I've met. But I saw it in the tech space with people had the best-selling app. They were like, you really need my app. And I was like, okay, like if you're not the top 24 apps on the first screen of someone's phone, then you're just fodder, right? So I think the thing that I try and help them with is the reality of what it's like to work in a club. Yes, sustainability in a club, in a brand, in a federation, in an association is very much on their radar, very much on their radar. But it's not the be all and end all. So it's just kind of toning that in the right way. I've just been quite honoured actually to get involved in the Euro 2028 RFQ for and just the reading of it was so genuinely refreshing in terms of the way that people who don't always get great press, let's be honest, have done a brilliant job of what percentage they want to get from local suppliers, where the sustainability levels need to be, what we would have to do as a vendor to get to be part of the select. Like I was so impressed. But then when you feed that back to some of the brands, they're like, we can't do that. We're too small. It's like, okay, so you've asked me to try and figure out what you need to do to be part of the RFQ. Well, here it is. Now, how can I help you go through that journey to be ready next time round or for the next tournament? So it's just this constant. It's like a dance actually. You're kind of like, come on, follow me to the right solution. But then on the other hand, you're then explaining to people at UEFA, hey, listen, really sorry we don't have this information, but look what it could do for the tournament. Can you extend the date for us so that we can get this time to get it. So that's been a really interesting. It's such a big tournament, and you read genuinely what they're trying to do to help UK suppliers be part of this incredible event. And they've been brilliant with us. They've been really flexible, really supportive, and there's been a genuine, yeah. We want the best that we can, the most sustainable we can, and we want to get as much as we can from the UK, which I think is commendable, really commendable.
Definitely, and it's probably quite rare. Do you know what I mean? For them to be so open and demanding of that.
Correct.
Kind of same question back to the other side, considering you're the guy in the middle. I'm going to get both sides. But, what advice do you have for the clubs and the federations in this space?
I think from what I've seen, federations, UEFA, they have numbers of people that specialise in it and they do it well. And then in a club, it varies head count, skill set, knowledge. There's this. I remember back in the day that the person that used to be the social media manager for a club was the kid who they went, "Well, your Facebook's great. Can you run our social media?" Right? And now within the clubs, certain clubs, and I'm talking sort of champ down, there's just like, well, you care about the planet. Do you want to be our sustainability person, right? And that's and I mean that like 3 or 4 years ago, because even now when I'm talking to League Two clubs, they've got a dedicated person or a dedicated amount of resource that is constantly on the lookout of how they are. Now that could be community, it could be sustainability, it could be how do we improve our responsibility to the local. There's lots of conversations taking place on how they do better. Let's say do better rather than whether they're green or sustainability or eco-friendly. And that's kind of rewarding. But I think it's coming from bottom up. I think young fans in particular are, and that's driven a lot of our activity. Actually, we have a page 2 in our company deck, which is the state of the nation and the lay of the land. Young fans are just becoming more demanding of brands, right? They're looking more at creds, their background, what do they do to the planet, all of that kind of stuff. And as a result of which, I think football clubs at all levels now are like, well, we need to be doing more, better, something else. I think that probably the biggest single weakness is this fear that I had 5 years ago of, I don't get it. Like, and I mean people in clubs who are like, yeah, there's a super person that works for a super Premier League club who I've had some incredible conversations with. And even now they're kind of like, I still don't get it, but it's on my agenda and I need to fix it. And thank you, Neil, for helping me, because if you didn't tone it down a bit and you didn't demystify it for me, I would have no idea what I'm doing. And sometimes I'm just kind of going, this is what you need to say on Tuesday at your meeting, and giving them the thing that they need to say on the Tuesday. And they're getting there, but it's like one of these classic, you've been there, Joe, there's these companies that go direction, strategy, vision, bosh, and then they go, right, you lot make it happen. And then the you lot are like, where do we start? Because I've still got a day job to do, right? I've still got to sell tickets and merch and, partnerships and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of feel sorry for them. But we're getting to that point now where we've been chatting for 5 years. So you should be there. You should know what to do. You should be able to manage. And in a lot of cases they are. I mean, the Red Way at Liverpool as an example, like I'm so genuinely impressed with most of the things that they're doing. And I love the fact that it's sponsored at a very senior level within the organisation. It feels like, I've been a Liverpool fan all my life. It feels like that thing is really embedded in all departments of the club. And I'm not just kind of bugling their activity because I'm a fan, but sometimes it needs to be called out. When people are doing a good job, you need to go, you're doing a great job. I think probably the biggest thing is that everybody's just trying to be perfect. And if I think about my journey, I'm like, if I can just be better tomorrow than I was yesterday, and I can learn a bit, people are frightened of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. And it's just like, look, if you can look yourself in the mirror and go, today, I would say I'm probably 65 to 70% of my work is all about helping responsible, sustainable businesses, right? But I don't hate myself for the other 35% that I'm doing because I just like it and I enjoy it. So I'm not trying to be perfect, but I feel like the balance is right now. Whereas before I was 85% consumer tech, make it happen, sell sport, do digital, and now I feel better for it. I do, and that's one of the things that I do say to people that are starting out on their journey is like, you won't necessarily earn the same money, but your bucket of value will just feel more filled because you're doing better stuff, whatever that better stuff might be.
And I guess that's how you define success, isn't it? Whether it's just how much you earn or actually whether you can sleep at night. So,
I've always slept well, but do you know what, mate? It's little things like and I don't want to sound like, you know, them people that smoked for years and then they don't smoke and then they start telling people like I just feel so much better going to the meetings that are about that than are about how do we take a couple of dollars off a product so that somebody can sell 8,000 more and then someone else is making 16 grand. Like those meetings where you're meeting with people that genuinely want to try and do better, they just feel better, you know. It's a lot nicer experience.
and that's exactly why I wanted you on the podcast, because it was almost like there's this energy and this lightness and this enthusiasm to do this that, you know, for people who I've seen work in corporate for a long time, it's just gone. And they are literally like, well, I can get 2 cents off that product. And, you know, it's just like the hamster wheel. Whereas I kind of felt like when I met you, I didn't obviously know you before, but like you'd had this a bit of awakening. You were like, there's another way to do business and you can do it really well and it can be really fun. And to me, that was a bit of a secret sauce in this, that, oh my goodness, it doesn't have to be serious and we don't have to beat ourselves up about what we don't know. You know, like we're not perfect, but actually we can have fun with this because there's new ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more of us as well, mate. Like it's funny, you when I think back 5 years, genuinely, I remember going to China. It was 2000 and late 2018, early 2019. And I started talking to suppliers about, you know, and they just thought, what is this guy on? Right. Like just now when I talk to my old mates who are still in manufacturing in China, I wouldn't say it's the norm, but they have a team that are trying to protect the planet, and they have individuals whose jobs it is to make sure that the dyes don't go into local rivers, and like, so there's a lot more of us. So I don't feel like the weirdo that I used to. And do you know what's really interesting? I tell you what's really interesting, because I was at a social event and it was a group of people who have known each other for quite a long time in the industry, and like 4 out of the 6 of us have we've kind of gone onto the dark side of like caring about, you know, where our kids are going to live in the future. So and then there's two that were like really, and it was like they felt like the weirdos. We were like, it's a massive reversal of like we're the new norm, and those that aren't are like, what, you're still denying it? Like what? But even if you don't believe it, still look after people and still look after plant. Like that's not a bad 2 Ps to start with, right? So you just and you get in the cab on the way back and you're like, wow, man, like they still don't get it. Like, but you know, and it was I have these constant little chuckles to myself where I'm like, I was that guy who was never a denier, but I was like, mate, I've got money to make, I've got family to feed, I've got things to do, I've got 45 employees, like da 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 da. And then you kind of go, well, you can still do it. You've just got to think differently, you've got to act differently, and you've got to employ different people, but it's still distinctly possible to do.
Can I just say, I feel like that's going to be the soundbite, that you're not the weirdo anymore.
Oh, that's a different question.
But when I was listening to you kind of throughout this conversation, I was like, probably most of your role is a bit of like the soft skills. You know, it's kind of like making sure that the club is okay, and convincing and influencing and hand-holding. And also when you're kind of talking now about that mindset shift, it's these kind of like, I don't know whether to use like emotional intelligence, but these soft skills, which actually seems as important or more important than the technical side of it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not necessarily a product thing. There's a huge amount of like social intelligence in this. And I just wonder, you know, do you feel that that's the case? And what are the key things in order to almost be successful in this space?
I honestly, like, I don't want to sound like some old school guru fella, but I just think whether it's sustainable, just the whole kind of how do we transact and do business together, generally speaking. And I try and get this into sales professionals that I'm trying to coach or help, and they come to me and I need to hit my numbers and yada yada yada, and you watch them, and 9 times out of 10 they know how to pitch, they know how to put a deck together, they know how to do pricing, but there's this weird lack of empathy, right? Like, and I know it sounds a bit twee, right? But if you go into any environment kind of not giving a shit about the other person's problem or how they're feeling, or like, and in the old days it was, that they used to call it as a trained sales guy, it was like that was the small talk, and you'd be looking past the buyer to see, family photographs and, hey, how's your kid? And all of a sudden you start building this level of platform of trust, right? And I just think there's this, everybody's got super busy, everybody's gone screen to screen, nobody's it's wrong to say, but there's so many people not giving a shit about the other person's issues. And that comes out in their tone, in their vocabulary, their choice of words. Somebody will put you a message, a meeting, it's like 25 minutes, hard stop. Okay, cool. And what happens is, I've been on the receiving end, I've jumped on these calls, and people they just go straight in and they go, by the way, we're at £4.73. And you're like, whoa, like, ask how they are, chat about that. You've still got a couple of minutes, like, just try and understand that. So I do think this empathy and understanding. So part of the thing that I do when I chat to a club is I'm like, where is it on your list of top 5? It's not even on it. Okay, cool. So now I start getting empathy for the supplier, because I'm like, well, they really want to work with you. So how can I move it up your criteria? Have you considered this? Oh, Jesus, no. You are aware of the new regulation, right? Well, no, I'm not. Right, now that's people can go, well, that's selling. That's not selling. That's having empathy for an employee who doesn't understand sustainability, isn't aware of the new regulation. So you make them aware of it and you say, look, I'll send you some information. And the reason why I'm helping this company is we feel like we can help you when that comes into play. Oh, brilliant. Now that's not being a good salesman. That's just going, listen, you do need to be aware. Like, that's just genuine empathy and curiosity to want to help the club and help the brand. So I think that it's like, it's an old school thing that I think, I don't want to make a broad statement, but I think there's a generation of people who kind of don't understand it as much as another generation of people do. I think it's a really important thing.
I mean, I totally agree with you with the old Teams countdown clock as well. You're constantly like, you've got 5 minutes left of this meeting. And one of the things that I'd loved that I'd seen on your like social media and things was that you do like walk and talks, like you have walking meetings.
Yes.
And just even approaching that differently, I think, is quite refreshing. And you've said that's really helped you in terms of actually people communicate more when you kind of take them for a walk.
Oh, for sure. I mean, honestly, I remember I did it. I think I was actually on the receiving end of it. So somebody said to me, we couldn't get a meeting in, and someone said, look, should we just grab a coffee and I'll walk with you to where you've got to go? I was like, brilliant. And I remember getting to the end, and I hadn't drunk any of my coffee because I'd just been talking about the problems that I'd got. It was basically with a guy from a logistics company, right? So we started walking, and I just went off on this rant for 20 minutes about our 3PL. And he was like, okay, cool, leave it with me, I'll come back to you. So I went to my meeting, I was like, I didn't even catch this guy's name. I was just ranting about logistics. But then I was like, wow, that was weird. Because if he'd have come to the office, I wouldn't have ranted, because I wouldn't want somebody to hear the rant. So I just started then integrating it into, particularly around COVID, I'd be saying to people, look, we can get together. Do you want to go for a walk? And we'd go for a walk. And the clients just found it super useful. And what I was getting, if I'm honest, I was getting all of the information that I needed to put the right proposal together that hit the mark. My conversion rate went through the roof because I'd spent an hour in the countryside, in nature, chatting to someone that wasn't this, it was like we're walking along together. So they told me more and I listened more because I shut up more. And then because you then understand what they really want, the proposal you send them back as a consultancy or an agency was just on the money. And I was like, this is working. It's actually weirdly, it's developing into, I'm going to launch a training and development business where 85% of the time you're going to be outside. Like, I'm really passionate about kind of changing the way that people are being taught things about business. And I'm kind of like, let's get people outside. Let's turn the phone off. Let's go and enjoy nature. Let's go and find the right place where they can feel creative and find some solutions. Because the training courses I've been on, you go to the same meeting room, you're sedentary, you get death by PowerPoint. It's all about the lecturer and their qualifications. None of it is bespoke. So I've got something in the works that hopefully I'll launch at the end of the summer.
This is very exciting. I love it. It's like just one more strand to your bow. And, I wonder whether, at the start you talked about your upbringing, actually challenging the status quo, especially in the way that we learn and showing that there is a different way. I think you're going to be incredible at it. I'm really intrigued to see where that goes. To be honest, I could talk to you literally all day, but given that we are on a countdown clock, I'm going to have to bring it to a close. But before we go, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wished I had, or anything you want to cover before we finish?
No, listen, I just think all of us just need to keep everybody honest, and you do that. I think you're brilliant at it. I remember the chat we had in Manchester, where I learned so much, and I think that's one of the things that I love about this. I don't know what you want to call it, just responsible community, where people pull you up and they go, "That's wrong. You should be doing." And I'm like, "Oh, brilliant! I love that shit. Like, I really do like that." And I think sometimes we all get a bit like, I see this a lot when we go to social events. People are easily, "Oh, I didn't get this response, and I didn't get," and I'm like, "Don't be giving up. Like, just be resilient, because it is happening. Like, I can see it, and I've been on this journey for a long time. The ship is turning. It might not turn at the pace that you would want it to, but it's definitely getting there. And I know you're a big advocate for this, but I think I see people that are on your podcast, and I'm just like, brilliant, like, well done. Like, we need to just try and keep getting this message out there as much as we possibly can. But all of us just need to be conscious of doing it in a way where we don't come across as being patronizing. We don't come across as telling the world what they should do. We just try and present them with, "Hey, listen, we think this is the problem, and we think we've got a couple of solutions. Come on a journey with us and see if it'll work." And I think when you do anything like that, most people are going to be open to having a conversation. And that's why I've really found within the football space, everybody that I spoke to went, "Football doesn't care." And I'm like, whoa, that's a really broad statement. And then when you go and talk to football at their level, with their language, in a way that they understand, they're like, "Well, of course we care. Whether we can do everything that everybody wants us to do is just a different thing." So I think we've all just got to keep at it. I'm certainly not in a position where I want to kind of slow down. So yeah, let's get at it.
I mean, I hope you never do slow down. But just kind of all praise to you that you've kind of gone and done this. It would be much easier for you to just sort of kind of carried on, have the cash kind of roll in. And I think it has been particularly brave for you to kind of think, actually, there is another way. And you've really inspired me to kind of say, actually, it can be fun. It can be commercial. You can talk the language, but you can make a huge difference. That it's not two worlds. And I really like the fact that you kind of say, I sit between these two worlds, because we need more people like that. It's not a black and white issue. We need to find the common ground. And I think you do that fabulously well. So
great.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure. I just wish my daughter, we're going to keep this bit in, right? Because Ellie's constantly at me she's like, "You should be doing more." And I keep saying, I'm trying to do my best. So thank you for saying that, Joe. I really appreciate it.
See, you can send that to her and you'll be like, "Look, I'm doing my job."
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time. That was great. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one day we'll have you and Ellie on the podcast together.
Oh, could you imagine?
Oh, I'd love that.
She'd be killing me. Yeah, she'd be killing me. She'd be ticking me off on everything I say. But yeah, we should do it. Let me just become a bit more established, and then we'll get on together. That'd be good fun.
Awesome. Well, until that time comes, thanks so much.